Hey friends, welcome back. We're, of course, reading through the Bible this year. Today we are in Leviticus chapters 10 through 13. And welcome back to the fun. I mentioned yesterday if you want to do some more, a much deeper dive, this book, Who Shall Ascend the Mountain of the Lord. I think it's only like $17 on Amazon, which is really good for something as academic-ish as this. It may be too much for you, but it's really interesting. Another great book that I'm reading, recommend both of these highly. The Old Testament Law for the Life of the Church, reading the Torah in light of Christ. Really good book. Lot of good stuff here. Recommend these both quite a bit. February reading calendar is in the description. If you want that, you should. If you're reading along with me by now, you probably have the year-long plan, but there's one for February that's in the description of today's video. If you'd like to print that off or save it put it in your Bible, we'll give you an idea of what the readings are for that particular day. So, all right, let me try to focus a little bit today. I know these videos have gotten long, on average half an hour to as much as 40 minutes at one point. I don't know quite how that happens. It's like a preacher time warp, and I'm still skipping a lot, but hopefully it's helpful to think along with me, for me to share some of the things that I'm learning, observing, some of the things that I'm still trying to figure out. There's a lot of that. Certain things are just starting to click, and they're exciting when they do. So we ended chapter 9 of Leviticus with the high point of the first day of the functioning of the tabernacle, with Aaron and his sons as the priests, and this introduction, and then at the end, Aaron blesses the people, and God's presence shows up powerfully, and the people shout for joy. They're excited. After this, in today's reading, comes a real downer. So this seems to be a thing, an up and down that we've seen throughout Exodus, really in Genesis 2, in a lot of ways. So in the beginning of chapter 10, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, what they actually do is a thing of kind of scholarly conversation. They took their censers. It's something that they would put incense on or in, put fire in them and added incense, and they offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, contrary to his command. Okay, so they're doing something that's not what God said to do. Are they just kind of taking matters into their own hands? It seems like they're being kind of very loose with their new job, so to speak. And there's some like debate and discussion about what did they try to go into the Holy of Holies? Did they just enter in, taking kind of upon themselves this thing? But in any case, what's clear is that they're departing from God's instructions here. We saw in Exodus and Leviticus that God said what to do, and when they did it, things went well. But Aaron's sons don't do what God said the way that God says, and they are and they're killed, right? So here's what it says, verse 2. So fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. So look how similar this is to what just happened in verse 24. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat portions of the altar. And now when these two do what's not for them to do, or in the way that not in the way that's commanded it, fire in a similar way. Fire comes out from the presence of the Lord and consumes them. So this idea of God as a consuming fire is both a good thing and a dangerous thing, very dangerous, right? And so the message is being very boldly sent, right? Don't play, don't mess around here. God's holiness is both powerful and awesome and wonderful, and deadly if it's not serious, right? Verse 3, Moses then said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord spoke of when he said, 'Among those who approach me, I will be proved holy. In the sight of all the people, I will be honored.'" Okay, so you don't just do what you want to do in this particular role. And remember, we're going to read a little bit today about clean and unclean, common and holy. When something or someone like these guys, these priests, was consecrated, set apart for God's purpose as holy, and then they took the disobedience in this way, right? It's deadly serious, as we can see. And it's interesting, if it's interesting, but it says Aaron remained silent. It could be a lot wrapped up in it. There's two of his boys, that are just wow, this is this is big stuff. So we're whether or not that makes you uncomfortable or not, that is what it is. And so it's something for us to reckon with. So Moses, verse 4, calls some other members of the family here, sons of Aaron's uncle, and says, carry your cousins outside the camp, away from the front of the sanctuary. So now this is a problem, because death is now in the holy place, in the sanctuary, and that's a big problem. Death is a major challenge here. So now the tabernacle itself is polluted. A lot more things I could go into here, but aren't going to. So look at verse 8. Then the Lord said to Aaron, "You and your sons are not to drink wine or fermented drink." So were these two guys, were they drunk? Were they drinking when they did this? And just sort of like people who sometimes drink, do stupid things. And so they had too much to drink, and they thought this would be a fun idea to just go in the tent as they wanted. Possibly. It doesn't say that, but it's right on the tail of that this injunction is giving. You and your sons are not to drink wine or other fermented drink whenever you go into the tent of the meeting, or you will die. That's what happened to them, right? So again, serious stuff. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come, so that, verse 10, so that you can distinguish between the holy and the common. So we're going to start to read a little bit about these categories that things, people, etc., are placed into. Holy, which is what the priests were, fully dedicated to the Lord. And so God didn't want them to be impaired in their ability to discern this. And verse 11, so that you can teach the Israelites all the decrees the Lord has given them through Moses. So there's a teaching aspect to the priesthood as well, in addition to the cultic or the sacrificial tabernacle keeping aspect. There's a discernment and a teaching aspect to the role of the priest as well. And they need to be sober-minded to do that, not impaired. And of course, we know alcohol can and does impair. So Moses said to Aaron and his remaining sons, there's two more, Eleazar and Ithamar. So they're still there as part of the Sacrificial system. All right, let me move on. So chapter 11, clean and unclean food. This is a big part of the law, the instructions that are given here, and it's confusing to us. I think it's possible to make some sense of it. I'm getting a little bit of a grasp on some of it, but there's I think remains some sense of mystery as far as what's what, why are certain things clean and certain things aren't. Maybe we'll go into some more detail about some possibilities there just to kind of get our minds around it. But I think the big thing to know, again, I'm always going to kind of bring up this big picture detail. We would like to know the detail. Okay, why is this animal for eating and this one not? But the big picture is that in the everyday of what God's people ate and didn't eat is this idea of discerning. Again, like it just said about with the priest discerning the holy from the common, and also we're going to be now discerning the clean from the unclean, and so that again worked like we saw about remembering through different things. Even in the daily course of what they ate and didn't eat, they would be reminded of their identity as God's people. And so the end of chapter 11 summarizes some of that and talk about. So I'm gonna, I think, pause on trying to talk about it because I'm still kind of trying to get a better handle on this myself, and it's going to come back around. So let's pause on trying to think about maybe what are some of the characteristics of the clean versus the unclean. Maybe there's certain things that you notice as well in there. Just to say one thing about it, one of the things that's suggested that covers not all, but a good bit of the things is animals that are carnivorous. They eat other animals, and remember we saw yesterday. We'll see again. You don't ever eat the blood, and this idea of violence. Maybe animals that kill other animals violently and that they eat the blood. That is kind of a second tier is off limits. So animals that are good are ones that chew the cud. They're vegetarians. They don't violently kill other animals and eat their blood in the process of consuming the animal. So that could be a piece of it. Some have suggested, and I think it makes some sense. There's more to it than just that, but that could be one of the aspects about why some animals are unclean and others are clean. We'll go back. We'll circle back around to some more aspects of this that may make some sense of it. But in any case, verse 42 of chapter 11, do not defile yourselves by any of these creatures. Do not make yourselves unclean by means of them, or be made unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy. Do not make yourselves unclean by any creature that moves along the ground. I am the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt. We see this Passover Exodus event recounted again and again. Therefore, be holy, because I am holy. Right. So the trajectory of God's people as they walk through, knowing Him and entering His presence and learning His ways, is that they would become more holy, more set apart, more following God's ways. Right, which is the intention from the very beginning, intention to the end, to have a people that are shaped as God wants us to be fully committed to Him. So things that aren't holy, that are common, they're not consecrated, can be either clean or unclean. So something that's clean, which they're kind of by default, is my understanding, as God's people, they're clean, they're common, not set apart like the priest is, or the things in their houses aren't holy the way the things in the tabernacle are holy. They're rather common, which isn't necessarily bad, but within that they can be clean or unclean. They can be defiled or polluted, which will make them unclean. So eating the wrong thing would do that. We'll see things like touching dead carcasses, dead bodies will do that. And so only clean people can approach the tabernacle in worship. Unclean cannot go into the tent of not even in the tent, but even to do the sacrifices. They have to be first clean or purified or cleansed if they've been made unclean by eating something or touching something. Or we'll see other examples now too, which complicates the picture a little bit as we go along here. So so verse 47, though, that ends chapter 11, you must distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between living creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. So that, again, even in the diet and so many things, God's people would understand themselves as set apart, that they would have to be thinking about these things, which again isn't, once you kind of, I think, figure it out, like it's not that hard. Like I don't think that if you have the right kind of animals there and you do the right kind of thing, it's not like it's necessarily that complicated. But if you're Jewish today and you're in a restaurant, it's a little bit more complicated with that kind of thing. So, all right, let's look at chapter 12 quickly, hopefully. So here's what gets a little bit more complicated and hard maybe to understand at times. There are certain things that will happen that are not bad things, like childbirth. Childbirth is not a bad thing. Remember, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. Like that's a good thing. But it makes someone unclean. So this is important because unclean is not necessarily sinful. Having a child is not sin. It's not something that somebody did wrong, but yet it makes them unclean for a period of time. After which, we'll see a little bit in the process in here. So this is just some things that we've got to kind of get our hands around. So, and this is a tough nut to crack of exactly the why. So exactly why. The best thing that I'm kind of hearing or reading right now, it's not maybe fully satisfactory, but when the kind of life forces within come out, whether that's blood, whether that's birth fluids, whether that's male reproductive fluids, when life kind of related fluids come out of one's body, it makes them impure for a time, different lengths of time depending on the thing. So I think that makes some level of sense. The other thing that some people have suggested is that maybe certain things makes one liable or reminded of death. Of course, when we're cut or bleeding, we're reminded that life isn't blood. When women give childbirth, that's risky in the ancient world, especially, and today still people can die in childbirth, so it's dangerous. But I think the life force fluids make some level of sense. But you can share your thoughts, what you think. I'll continue to read it more, and I'll share if I learn anything that seems more interesting as time goes on. So chapter 12, verse 2, a woman who becomes pregnant, gives birth to a son, will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during her monthly periods. So I mentioned that. So that's that's the thing. Then the woman must wait and be purified from her bleeding. She must not touch anything sacred or go to the sanctuary until the days of the purification are over, right? So when a woman in this context of situation either has her monthly period or gives birth, there's a period where she goes from clean to unclean, not because she did anything wrong, right? You can't control that, at least your monthly cycle. And certainly, again, childbirth is not bad, but she will, for that period of time, go from clean to unclean, and she can't go to the sanctuary, to the tabernacle, until she again becomes clean. This will happen for guys too in different ways. Maybe unsurprising that, like the rest of the world, women oftentimes have extra challenges, right? So sorry, ladies. I guess that's just kind of how it is. So here's an interesting New Testament connection as well. Verse 6, when the days of purification for a son or daughter are over, okay, so this is after giving birth, she is to bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or a dove for a sin, or I think better in your footnote, if you have the NIV like me, purification offering. Now, there's some kind of loose connection here. There's some kind of connection here between the sin and the impurity. But again, I think it's important to recognize that this is not sin. So I'm going to make a connection here with Mary and Joseph in Luke 2:24, I think it is, when they go through this process, right? So they have not sinned, but they still need to be pure, go through a purification, or she needs to go through a purification because she went from clean to unclean. Needs to go through a purification process to go from unclean back to clean, so that she can go potentially, back into the life of drawing near to God through the tabernacle, later temple. Does that make some level of sense? I know it's a little bit whatever, but please don't just glaze over. I mean, you can glaze over at my effort to explain it, but don't leave Leviticus without trying to get your hands around this somewhat, so that it's not just like, I don't know, it's way too confusing for me. Please commit to that. Try to get some level of understanding of this holy, common, clean, unclean. Try to get a sense of this, because it really is important to understand what's going on here. So verse 6, when the days of her purification for son or daughter over, she is to bring to the priest a lamb for burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a dove for the sin offering. He shall offer them there to the Lord to make atonement. Remember, atonement back to at-one-ment, back to unity. And then she will be ceremonially clean from her flow of blood. These are the regulations for a woman if she gives birth to a boy or son. Verse 8, but if she cannot afford a lamb, she has to bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin or purification offering. And we saw that, we see in Luke that Mary and Joseph bring 2 birds, which some have suggested which makes some level of sense, that they weren't wealthy, because otherwise they would have likely brought a lamb, but instead they don't. So that's where one of the major reasons why this idea of that comes from. So this is the background for that in Luke. So this is really helpful, right, to understand what's going on and why it is that she's going to the temple for that. Okay. In the same way, the priest will make atonement for her, and she will be clean, right? Which is like we saw earlier, will be forgiven. So again, why this isn't sin. It doesn't say she'll be forgiven. She's not sinned to be forgiven, but she's under this system unclean and needs to be purified or made clean again. Okay, so not sin, but not not clean, right? Okay, hopefully that's making a little bit of sense here, but feel free to share your thoughts, questions, etc. about that. All right, chapter 13 is where I'm going to call it for today because I'm going to talk about it tomorrow. Skin defiling diseases, which is sometimes called leprosy, but it's kind of a bigger category than that. But this is another thing. So we talked about food. We talk about fluids coming out of one's body, skin, various skin diseases. So what are these? These are all things that could potentially lead towards death, or there are things that are blemishes. So like animals for sacrifice couldn't have obvious things on their animal bodies. So these are things that are signs of not wholeness, not health, and they need to be dealt with. So hopefully you read through that and you have something of a gist of that. But tomorrow we'll pick up and talk about cleansing from them. We'll talk a little bit more about them, and we'll talk about mold and a little bit more. So it'll be a chance to kind of go in again and do some reminding and some additional stuff on a topic today. So I think we talked about quite a bit already. So feel free to leave your thoughts, comments, questions, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.